to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host, Rich Geary, with you as well. And we're going to pick up where we left off a few weeks ago, a little bit more on biblical Old Testament chronology, timelines, things like that.
And we're going to finish up our discussion about the kings.
Yep.
And we're also going to do another show after this about the Persian Empire. And that will pretty much wrap up our discussions about the biblical timeline. Now, the biblical timeline is important for us to discuss because if you look in the first few chapters of Matthew and in Luke, you have two different genealogies that lead from Adam all the way up to Christ.
Although Luke's the only one that goes back to Adam. Okay. Luke's interesting. He starts from Jesus and goes back to Adam. Mm-hmm. Matthew starts with Abraham. Okay. And goes down to Jesus. Okay, so it's interesting because where the difficulty lies is the time after King David, because they seem to be different, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And that's where a lot of people have had troubles over the years.
And they say, the Bible's inconsistent with itself.
Well, it's actually very consistent once you understand what it's really getting at in the two different genealogies and why they did the two different genealogies. So that's very important. The thing about it, last time we talked about up to the fall of Samaria, if you will, the northern kingdom of Israel. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that was really, we made the comment, and we've noticed that when Jeroboam broke off from Rehoboam, right after Solomon, Israel really never had a good king.
That's right, yeah.
They really never had a good one. But the reality was, Judah wasn't a whole lot better. There was a few of them, several of them started off good, but they always seemed to mess up. So often, Solomon started off, was given the gift of wisdom. He had all this, but he did things he shouldn't have done. He multiplied horses unto himself. He multiplied wives unto himself. He multiplied gold and silver unto himself. Those things are expressly forbidden by Moses. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting from that time, and of course, from that point, his kingdom was going to be thrust from him, but for his father David and for his beginnings, it was not going to be in his lifetime.
Yeah, Solomon asked for wisdom, and then after a while, he decided, I just want to mess around and do my own stuff.
He had 1,000 wives and concubines. He was just a guy, including the daughter of Pharaoh. And this is a guy supposed to be the smartest guy who ever lived, and he was and when he started out, it was very good. It just goes to show you that really in our own nature, we really can't sustain anything really good for a long time. We are made in the very image of the Creator God, and yet with all that, the fall of man is very evident in so much of what we do. Nevertheless, the whole point of the chronology, as we've talked many times, has been to point us the way to Messiah.
Right.
And there's all these little dipsy doodles along, and of course the chronology went underground a little bit. It went from when it started with individuals, then it went to a family, then it went to a nation, and then it continued on with a nation, but through the line of the kings. Okay, and that makes it a little easier, but not easy. As we talked about last time, there are a lot of things that seem to be contradictory on the surface until you explore as to why they're writing it the way they wrote it. It's interesting. Matthew seems to, when we get into Matthew's genealogy, there's a couple of kings, there are a couple of things that are skipped in there, and that's purposely done because they can, even in the Old Testament, it talks about he was one in, I think the Book of Kings talks about 22 years in reigning. I'm trying to think of the king itself, and then in the other one it says it's 42 years, and that seems to be directly contradictory. Except when you understand it's the beginning of the lineage. There's a 4 generations lineage, and that was skipped in Matthew. Okay, it's really funny those ones were skipped. Okay, because they were really of the house of Ahab. And this is the thing that we talked about last time. Again, Jehoshaphat had a righteous king, but he made a very serious error. He made common cause with the king of Israel, Ahab, one of the most wicked kings of all time. In fact, so much so that he named one of his sons after Ahab's firstborn, and Ahab names his son after one of Jehoshaphat's sons, and both of them turned out to be rotten. Okay?
Yeah.
Okay, they didn't turn out to be good at all.
Was that Ahaziah?
Azariah and Jehoaz, and I think that's how, I have to look at. There's so many of these kings, and what's really, my brother James always gets on me because we love Lord of the Rings, right? And he always gets mad that Sauron and Saruman are so similar sounding. Mm-hmm. You ain't need nothing until you get to the biblical kings. You got the same names for Israel and Judah, but the Bible's very clear on who they are. Whether they're the kingdom of Israel, Jehoaz, or the kingdom of Judah, Jehoaz, and Joash, and Jehoash, and those kind of names. It's made very clear. We're not going to go into all that. It'd be really good to do that, but there's been books written on all this stuff. But all these chronologies make sense when they really figure out why they're writing the way they wrote it. Okay, and because that's been a very big point of contention for a lot of people. Well, basically people who don't want to believe the Bible, but even people who want to believe the Bible, who do believe in it, have a hard time with some of these. Really, on the face of it, seem to be almost they are directly bald-faced contradictions. In fact, I might be able to read you the one thing. I think we might have read it last time. I'm not really sure. It's pretty interesting.
Before you do that, I want to actually figure out why. You might have a different genealogy between Matthew and Luke.
Okay.
And the reason is that they're actually talking about the genealogy of Joseph versus the genealogy of Mary.
Yeah, that's why it's only contradictorily sounding after David.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that important? We haven't really talked about any of that, but there have been prophecies, and David himself knew. He said, even if my line does not stay faithful, nevertheless my line will not be cut off. In forever, and that was a prophecy about the birth of Christ. Okay,
right.
So what happened though, and this is really if a prophet would have done this in the modern day, we wouldn't have stoned him because we don't stone people like they did in the Old Testament, and they didn't even do it with probably sometimes they should have done when a false prophet came around, but he basically says this was when you get to the last king of Israel, Jehoiakim. Or Jehoiakim, or Jeconiah, okay? And he says, even if you are a signet on my right finger, I take that ring off and throw it away. Your line is cut off forever. The physical line of David was destroyed to be in Israel, a king in Israel, ever again. Yet you say, how in the heck? Well, because the prophecies are really twofold. We don't really realize this when you're getting into them. They're really talking about his physical line, a literal physical line, but they're also talking about who has to be a king has to be from the royal line, okay? And the royal line was always the firstborn, or pretty much always. Mm-hmm. But there was an exception. It was really bad after this thing in the northern kingdom got so bad with Jehoshaphat and his sons and stuff, and then one son, Azariah, gets killed, and the mother, Athaliah, the only woman queen, she took over. She killed all of the sons, all of the sons. But Joash was spared. A guy with a midwife or something took him and secreted him away. And Athaliah reigned for 6 years, and she was slain. But she was rotten. Okay, but she was the daughter of Ahab. Okay, because her husband married the daughter of Ahab. That's how close affiliation they had. This was a mess. Okay? Yeah,
to talk about Ahab a little bit, because his wife was Jezebel, and Jezebel was really one of these dominant women who, and she was pretty much demon possessed.
She was awful.
But Ahab was more like of a weasel. But he
was pretty bad in his own right. He brought all the Baal worship. Yeah. He was bad.
But he caved into his wife.
He caved into his wife a lot, but it's on him too. Jezebel was so bad, and of course during this particular period of time, I think it was this time when the prophets of Elijah and Elisha were up there, and I know being part of the charismatic, I love the gifts of God. You say. I remember asking the Lord one time, says, Lord, why can't you just be responsive all the time, not just when times are really rotten? And he goes, well, that'd be heaven, and you're not there yet. He says, you need to know this is a broken, fallen world. It's not that great. It still sees my presence in it. We've talked about that. We still see the signs of the Creator in His creation, but it's broken. And a lot of things reveal that. to us. And one of those is we don't have God just speaking to us like he did sometimes. In fact, sometimes it feels like he almost hides himself until things are so bad that he has to reveal himself. And he did that with Elijah and Elisha, who two of the greatest prophets of Israel next to Moses. This was the time of the prophets, Isaiah and Jeremiah, when we get to the fall of the southern kingdom. And all these prophets were during this particular period of time giving warnings over and over and over again. And northern kingdom never really got it right. When we get to this article, there's an article I wrote up. It's really good, but a little more in depth than we have time for in the show here. But the standard chronology for the fall of the northern kingdom is 722 BC. But use biblical chronology, it's about 82 years off. Okay? And it should be about 640 is when the fall of the northern kingdom happens. And the southern kingdom, they get it in 586 BC. Again, that's about 80. It's off. And Cyrus comes in about 526. 457. 526 is more of the Babylonian captivity. The point of it is, why this is critical is because when the Bible shuts off after the fall of Israel, the Babylonian captivity. Okay, we haven't gone into all the kings here, so we're going to some. We're going pretty fast. You're gonna have to look up some of these up. One of the best books I recommend is The Wonders of Bible Chronology by Philip Morrow. If you can find it, not always easy. One by Martin Anstey called The Wonders of Bible Chronology. These are some good ones. There's Dr. John Lightfoot has some chronological stuff. If you can dig some of his stuff up,
and Isaac Newton, right?
Isaac Newton, of course, Bishop Ussher has good things. Ussher, though, brought in what so many chronologists do, the canon of Ptolemy. And that causes a lot of problems because Ptolemy was a pagan Egyptian, okay? Wrote 6 centuries after the fall of Babylon. He puts 10 Persian kings in. The Bible only talks about 5.
Yeah.
Okay? And so that causes a lot of grief. I'm convinced, more and more that I read of it, that many of these kings and names that that Ptolemy mentions, he's like say the 2nd century AD, after Christ. He basically probably was using names that were nicknames or variants of the same name of the same king as he got called by certain things. This article here is really good because I'm going to go into this a little bit here. The title of it is Darius the king of Ezra 6:14 and 15 the same king as the Artaxerxes of Ezra 7:1? And that causes a lot of problems because several of the Persian kings called themselves Ahasuerus. A lot of called themselves Artaxerxes, which meant chief ruler. Xerxes meant just ruler. It's like the Shah. It's the same it's a title like Pharaoh and Caesar. So we're not quite to there yet, but we want to get, we're jumping around a little bit. I hope it's not too confusing in the audience out here. If you're not familiar with this stuff, it's confusing even if you are familiar with it. You go into this stuff and you go into the dates and the chronology, but the Bible's got it all laid up. You begin to realize why does God spend so much time putting all this stuff down? And it goes back again to what we said earlier. They wanted the Jews to know exactly who Messiah was when he came.
Exactly, and the history is important because even if we don't have all the dates that tie it together within the Bible, you can get an approximate history from the list of kings in the chronologies.
And you get even closer than that because what you do, the Bible is not, it gives us a detailed list of the, like I say, the patriarchs in Genesis, then it goes through the Levite thing, went through Moses, and then we go through the Judges, and then we go through all the kings, and all the way down to the fall, and then we have Daniel, we got Haggai, Zechariah, which is really the post-exilic people, and all the way to Malachi, and then all of a sudden, the Bible, the Old Testament canon cuts off. And you're going, why? God, you spent all this time giving a link, and then also right in critical times, the Messiah, there's 400 years where basically it's quiet. Now there were prophets during that period of time, but they were never recognized with the authority as a Jeremiah or an Isaiah or even a Habakkuk. You know, they call them the minor prophets because they were generally smaller. But and I've always been fascinated as how they knew what makes them different. Now, in hindsight, we say, well, they're the writings that survive. But we have some writings from the intertestamental period, they call it, that period of the Maccabees, the period of the Greeks. But before that happens, the Lord is giving us all this detailed chronology of the different kings, how long they reigned. And of course, when the kingdom of the northern kingdom and southern kingdom, we laid down the rules last time. You had the northern kingdom is a different way of calculating it. The southern kingdom than the southern kingdom, but they all include its inclusive years. Okay, I will tell you that this. It says in the first period, the sum of the reigns of the 6 kings of Judah, Rehoboam to easy for me to say, Ahaziah is 95 years. The sum of the reigns of the 9 kings of Israel from Jeroboam to Jehoram is 98 years, but the true chronology of the period is 90 years. Okay? The explanation of the discrepancy lies in the fact that in the figures 95 and 98, some years have been reckoned twice over. We talked about that last time. Okay? One goes to the end of the end of the last king, and also counted the first king, the reign of the first king. Sometimes that happens. Okay? In the second period, the sum of the reigns of the 6 kings and 1 queen of Judah from Athaliah to the 6th year of Hezekiah. Okay, that's when you get that's right in that period in the fall of the northern kingdom, including the interregnum. Now, for those who don't know what an interregnum is, from the scriptures it becomes very clear there's a couple of periods where there were no kings in Judah and Israel. There's a couple of breaks there. Not many, but they did happen. And one of them is 11 years, and so the total of those things would be 176 years. But the sum of the reigns of the 10 kings of Israel from Jehu to Hoshea, and Jehu was the guy that killed Ahab.
Oh yeah.
And he's the one that it caused Jezebel to be killed, and that's why. And the son of Jehoshaphat, fights with the king of northern kingdom, and they both get killed on the same day because they went against the anointed Jehu, who was not that great himself. He goes, but he was the one chosen by God to get rid of the dynasty of Ahab. Okay.
Yeah, basically Jezebel became dog food.
She became dog food. He said that she got thrown off the top of her tower, and the dog started looking up her, eating her carcass. You know, I mean, the Bible's pretty gross, man. It can really get pretty graphic there. Anyway, the sums of the 10 kings of Israel, just Jehu to Hoshea, including the interregnums of 22 and 8 years. So there was 2 interregnums in the kings of Judah. Is 175 years, reckoning a full year each to Zechariah and Shallum. The true chronology of the period, however, is 174 years, and the explanation of the discrepancy is the same as before. Now, in the third period, that's what we're really kind of want to talk about a little bit. We're now only in the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom are done, okay? In the third period, the sum of the reigns of the 6 kings of Judah, from the 6th year of Hezekiah to the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, is 114. The true chronology of the period is also 114 years. So you don't have all the back and forth stuff. So that's a little easier from that. And really, we talked about a lot of the stuff that seemed to contradict itself. It's really amazing when you really understand what they're really trying to tell you and why they're telling you this way. They did not want to have like the 3 kings that were descendants of Omri.
Right.
Matthew ignores them as well. And that's why I talked about the 1 king who they start counting it. That's in the 4th generation. He basically is a son of 42 years, okay, rather than 22 years, which was the literal time how he was. So anyway, so we have Hezekiah, who was a righteous king, although he made a big bonehead mistake.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that because that's kind of interesting because actually he got sick and God told him he was going to die.
Yep.
And so Hezekiah begged God to let him live. He didn't really have an heir at the time, did he?
No, that's what it was. He did not have an heir. Yeah.
And so finally, God said, "Well, I'm going to add 15 years to your life." But
guess who was born during that time?
Manasseh. And so there was, and then the other thing happened was that the bonehead mistake that he made during his last 15 years, and that was he showed off all his gold and silver to the Babylonians.
Yeah, it was wild.
You really didn't want to do that, did you, Hezekiah?
Yeah, I can't remember. It's been a while since I read this, but there was at least, I can't remember how many errors or bad things happened because of that 15 years. Right. Not in Hezekiah's own life. He stayed pretty good all the way to the end. He's one of the few kings, I think, and Jehoshaphat was actually a righteous king earlier on. It's just that he made that bonehead thing, making common cause with the king of Israel, who was really rotten. But Hezekiah, his son Manasseh, and what's interesting, normally a long reign for a typical reign, if you will, of a law is 40 years. Manasseh reigned, I think, 55 years or something like that, longer than any other king, I think, in Israel. He was a long-lived king. But interestingly enough, and almost no one ever talks about this, Manasseh repented.
Yeah, he did.
When he was in jail or in prison, he repented, but he was the rottenest king Israel ever had. The worst. Brought in all the idols, fornications, all the sodomites, all the stuff that, he brought all that back. I mean, this guy was horrible, never kept his word, and then, of course, rebels, gets thrown in prison, and repents.
And then isn't there actually a book, The Prayer of Manasseh, that is one of the Apocrypha?
Oh, I've not read that. I have not read that.
There is a...
But it does talk about what his prayer is in jail. The Bible does talk a little about the words in it, but he sees the light and he comes back and is with God. But unfortunately, it didn't take very long because his sons,
the damage was done.
The damage was done. And we're getting to the point.
I also wanted to talk about, the sign that God gave Hezekiah.
Oh yeah,
which was he was going to. God asked him, "You want me to move the sundial
15 degrees
back or 15 degrees forward?" And he says, "Well, move it back. That's really a miracle." And so God did give him that sign, and we've been trying to figure it out ever since how that actually worked.
It's really funny. Even Christians, believers in the creation of God, we there's the Joshua long day and the Hezekiah 50 degree. We can't figure it out, because what would have to happen for that to happen in a normal environment? There's no way to explain that in any kind of a rational, non-miraculous way.
Well, in a world where, in Star Trek, where Q reigns.
I think these people, but you have to, the sun would, whichever way you do it, whether the earth stops moving or the sun moves, how does it do that, That's God. God has ways he is beyond time. And there are certain points, and those two examples, we have to basically back off and say, we don't have the answer to it.
And this is a miracle, and really that's what the definition of a miracle is that God intervenes and he does something outside of his normal nature of what we would expect the natural physics to actually take place.
And I know, you think about things like, and Jesus did some of those, obviously walking on the water, but multiplying the loaves and fishes. He's creating something ex nihilo. Actually, he's creating it out of something in this case, but he's making something out of nothing. And there are things that happen. And you just say this is beyond anything we can possibly.
Now, let me just interject there. What we would also understand is that we are actually relying on a similar kind of miracle. When we die, we're going to dust. Our bodies go to dust. We are dependent on the resurrection that will take place after we die.
Yeah, for those who are not unaware of the fact, the true biblical reality is not that we're going to be disembodied spirits playing harps up in heaven forever and ever and ever. We are supposed to get a new glorified body. And what that fully means, the debates go on and on as well. But we do have some glimmerings from Christ when he rose from the dead. He can eat. but he wasn't bound by time and space in the sense that we are now. So there are things, those are a couple things we get out of it.
Right,
But,
yeah.
all right, so anyway, so Israel gets really, really, they had Hezekiah, because Hezekiah's father was horrible too. Hezekiah's father was Asa, I think that was his father.
No, Asa was Jehoshaphat's
Yeah,
father.
Asa was, Jehoshaphat's father. Back to life, I'll look it up in the reference here, but his father, he didn't last very long, but he was really bad. And
Yeah.
Hezekiah, though, was good, but Manasseh was bad. He did repent at the end of his life, but the damage was done. Then you had Zedekiah, Jehoiakim, and then Jehoiachin, or Jehoiachin, or if you will, or Jeconiah. Jeconiah, Jehoiachin, same guy. Okay, and one of them was really the uncle, and he changed his name, and he ruled for 12 years there, but he wasn't really in the lineage. Jeconiah was of the lineage, and that's the one where God says, if you were a signet ring on my right hand, I would pluck you off and throw you away. Your line is cut off for forever from the king line is cut off. And so, Doug, we get into the point, and we're not, next show we'll talk about like the Persian Empire a little bit about, because it's something the Intertestamental time. But we will talk. The Matthew did. We alluded to it. Matthew's genealogy seems to be the lineage of the royal line.
Okay.
And it seems to be of the line of Joseph. People think Joseph is sort of an afterthought. Why did Matthew spend so much time on this guy? Because if Joseph was not of the royal line, that's why they had to go to Bethlehem. Because the male line had to go where their ancestry was. Okay, if he was not of the royal line, Jesus could not be Messiah.
Right. Yeah.
But you say, well, yeah, but he was virgin birth. So he wasn't born not physically of the royal line, but he was legally of the royal line of David. He was the firstborn and of the royal line. Luke, though, seems to go through Mary's genealogy. And we're not going to go into this right now. There's been a lot of people talking about that, but it's interesting how the lineage from Adam to Abraham, there's no contradiction, because only Luke talks that part. From Abraham to David, they're identical.
All right.
But from David down, it splits. Okay? And this is the thing that understands, only God could have figured this out, the genius of it, to say, all right, I'm cutting the royal line, the seed of the royal line is cut off. But the seed of the woman is not going to be.
Right.
In fact, from way back, from Genesis chapter 1, the seed of the woman is a veiled reference to the virgin birth. So he was going to be of the literal seed of David, though. He was going to be of that, or of the lineage, the physical line of David, but not the physical royal line of David. Well, I'm getting a wrap-up sign, Doug. We better cut this off. It's getting pretty interesting, though,
Well, we'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.